This is the story of a passionate leader dedicated to environmental justice and equity. After graduating from Chapman University in 2019 with a degree in political science, she now serves as senior policy manager at Brightline Defense, shaping policies that create real-world solutions. She is known for her compassion and unwavering commitment to doing what's right. This is the story of Alexis Jasmine Sutterman, someone who's not just a trailblazer in environmental justice, she's also my big sister. Alexis, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, John Lincoln, for that very kind introduction. I'm really excited to be on your podcast. And in addition to me on this podcast, you'll probably also get guest appearances from one or maybe both of my cats here. So they're roaming around. So excited to be on here. Thanks.
How did you get your start in environmental justice?
In terms of my start, I would say that I grew up not knowing what environmental justice meant, but of course living the reality of various environmental injustices. And by that I mean, so I grew up in Westminster, in Orange County, California, and even just growing up in that area, there were a lot of industrial facilities next to a lot of freeways, not a lot of like Trader Joe's or Whole Foods near my area. And I think just later on, getting to understand how your zip code can really impact your everyday reality in terms of what you have access to. So growing up in that environment, later recognizing that just, driving 10, 15, 20 minutes away to Irvine, to, South Orange County, Laguna Niguel, Laguna Beach, right? There's such a big disparity in terms of what kind of environment you get to live in, just depending on your socioeconomic status, your zip code, your things that are really in so many ways out of your control as a child, and in a lot of ways out of your control as a even into adulthood because of a lot of the conditions and structures that were kind of placed in. So in college is when I really learned that vocabulary and that understanding of these systemic injustices that have really meant that both the communities of color and low income communities are being harmed by some of the same sort of logics that harm the planet that we're on. And we have finite resources on this planet. However, we've really centered on a culture of extraction from the planet and from people towards a pursuit of profit accumulation. Learning that, I also got to go on some really eye-opening trips to Palestine, for instance, and got to see global conflict and war that are creating really, really treacherous conditions for people all across the world. And to me, I really found the connection point to be environmental justice because to describe environmental justice, it's really about not just transforming, not just protecting like the whales and the mountains and beautiful landscapes. That's really important, but it's also about extending that to the environments are that we're living in, working in, going to school in. It's our everyday conditions. So really got to see that we can really transform our systems to be more regenerative and caring, and that kind of thinking and that kind of mentality and that kind of compassion is what we need to also protect ourselves against climate collapse. So I won't go on and on, although I can, but that's really kind of how I got my start. And luckily, through a fellowship in college, got to jump into the environmental justice policy movement, and I've been working in it ever since. So yeah.
Well, that's great to hear. Is there any specific moment or perhaps a professor who sparked your interest in all of this?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. It's so nice to think about the really wonderful professors that I had at Chapman University. Shout out to Chapman alumni or people in that area. I think something that I didn't mention too in my really long monologue a second ago was that, you know, going to college, I am a first gen student, as in I'm, my parents didn't go and graduate from a four-year university. So I did have to navigate a lot of that on my own, or just really trying to how to apply to FAFSA? What do I want to do with my life? Those kinds of things felt really confusing at the age I was at. And I did go to New York for 1 year, and I went to a university there, the new school. I think after that, just trying to figure out my place, figure out my economics, ended up moving back home and took a semester at a community college, which I really, really valued as well. In my journey, and got to meet a lot of great people there. Did speech and debate team. Got to meet all different sorts of friends there, and ultimately it led me to apply to Chapman University from a desire to think about broadcast journalism and other sort of communications work that I was thinking of doing. But being at Chapman, surprisingly, even though Chapman itself isn't known for its, necessarily known for its like really civically engaged student base, I as much as maybe some other universities are known for. Surprisingly, Chapman is really where I found my political awakening and my political home in a sense, because I had some really wonderful professors in the poli sci department that got me to open my eyes towards these larger social issues that I was really curious about learning about. And Dr. Crystal Murphy is one shout out. As if I'm able to send this to her, I want to. I remember in one of her classes specifically, I remember her saying to us, what if the issues of the world, or some of the big issues and challenges and struggles, what if it's not by accident necessarily, but what if some of this is playing out how it was intentionally designed by some entities? And that's not to say that there's all these evil people out there trying to create suffering per se, but it does get you thinking like, hey, like, what if there are certain interest groups, certain elites, certain, I will maybe get into this a little bit later, but, certain MAGA types, or even fascist elements, fascist types, fascist rulers that are that are creating the infrastructure for these social inequities because it benefits, their elite class. And obviously the issues are much more complicated than that, but I think that did spark in me, hey, I want to be more critical of these systems because I think we can do better. I think we can redesign these systems. It's not natural and inevitable for there to be human suffering, even if that's something we've seen throughout the whole course of human history. That doesn't have to be natural. That can be redesigned in the vision that we have now. So shout out to Dr. Crystal Murphy. Shout out to also Dr. Sandra Alvarez, and a lot of really wonderful professors I got to learn from at Chapman.
Of course, I really agree with your opinion on the fact that the current situation isn't inevitable. I once heard that the reason we study history isn't necessarily to learn from our mistakes, but to liberate us from the past and to gain new possibilities for what our society can be like. How did you feel learning all of this information?
I think each year even is interesting because it just builds upon that kind of original political awakening to see, wow, the world is bigger, it's more complicated, there's more bad in it, there's more good in it. It really did, that was the initial spark point, I think, that opened up my horizons, based on a lot of cumulative experiences that I was grateful to have through my college experience. But I think every year since then has been just a continuous challenge of my own thinking and perspectives based on the nature of life, right? Of continuously getting exposed to new information, new data, new ways of thinking in the policy world. So not to say that I've like jumped from Democrat to Republican or something like that. It's not as simple as that binary. It's more just that, my vision and my principles have remained grounded and wanting to pursue solutions that bring more human liberty, freedom, justice, access to basic needs. That has remained constant, but think my own ideas of how we get there, the strategies we need to deploy, that is always in flux. And so I do think it's an interesting experience just growing up and seeing, um, being humbled, I think, that you will not ever have all the answers. Probably that's just the nature of life, but just continuously striving to grow and gain more information and trusting in our community and our network of scientists, innovators, writers, artists, all types of people. How do we collaborate? How do we trust each other to move towards a better society? And we're obviously going to stumble along the way, but like I mentioned earlier, it's needed now more than ever, people to just at least be engaged and try to figure out if there's a part we can play in moving towards a better world where people feel like they can, more comfortably, creatively live out their lives.
Of course. And in regards to cooperation, I also think it's very important that different people, despite how different they can be, they need to cooperate because that's what I believe differentiates humans from all other animals. Our ability to cooperate in large scale and in
Yeah.
flexibility.
Did you read
Um,
that in Sapiens?
yes, I did. That
I
was
know he shouts
a
that
great
out.
book.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree.
But going back to your personal experiences, I know you mentioned your trip to Gaza when you were in college. How did that affect your mentality and views on the world?
Yeah, this is it is an important time also to be reflecting on that as, the audience, as folks know, um, that there is even more escalating conflict in the region. I'll say getting to travel to a region in which there is so much active violence and uh, government sanctioned war, essentially, and genocide of people. It was a really special trip because the trip itself was with a lot of other, college students such as myself that came together to try to educate ourselves about the conflict. So even let me just take a step back and say this experience of the Olive Tree Initiative was really valuable, and I think we intended to be very thoughtful with how we visited the region because sometimes, as folks may know, there could be sort of some issues with more like saviory type trips, or if you're trying to just tokenize communities or say like, oh, like go in there just for our own education and not to actually help and think about our role in this, right? So I think we intended to be really thoughtful about this, and even before going to the trip, our cohort, we did a lot of readings. We talked about the issue a lot for like weeks or even months, I think, before the trip. So I think that is important to do just in general when people are, if you're going to jump into this really controversial and very devastating type of issue. So we did a lot of that kind of learning on our own. But again, going to the trip, going to the actual region, talking to Palestinian refugees, talking to Israeli soldiers, talking to um, uh, different figures from the Israeli government. So people on so many different parts that are touching different parts of the conflict. I think having that open dialogue, it's just there's nothing like it, right? It's like that's the kind of stuff you can't read in a textbook. So it was very valuable in getting to see both the complexities of how every type of person can take something very different away from the conflict or can have a personal attachment to the issue that is unique in some ways, but also all tied together based on some foundational human values, which is just wanting to live in freedom, wanting to protect your children, wanting to have food to eat. So it really humanized the conflict in a lot of ways, but it also made it ever more clear to me that this does not need to be political or bipartisan in the same way in the way people try to make it. And that's how I generally feel about so many different issues in the world. It's not, you know, are you Democrat? Are you Republican? Are you left? Are you right? All those terms can be helpful in some ways, but at the end of the day, I think of it more as, there's this really rich and complex history that has led up to certain humanitarian crises in the world. But at the end of the day, what's happening now, right? And getting to see that right now, people are in starvation. It's on the brink of Gaza itself is on, the brink of collapse in terms of its ability to bring people proper nutrition, proper health care. Children are suffering, right? So when you get to that element, to me, it's more okay. So how do we now deploy the best strategies to bring humanitarian relief to that region and to find a path forward. So there's so much I can say about that conflict, that can touch upon so many different angles of it. But I think that's my main takeaway from that trip and from my continued learning on it is just we have to find a way to cut out the chatter, not cut out the complexity, but think about the now and think about how to address human suffering now. And that's not a political issue per se. It's really like a human issue. So yeah, that's what I'll say about that for now, but happy to I'll touch on it more afterwards too.
When you actually go there and know people face to face, it can feel a lot different than just hearing news stories about what's happening. Um, I was learning in my history class right now that in the past, what most drawings of wars used to be like was to depict only the famous generals and not really go into the complexities of all the actual soldiers doing the fighting.
Mm,
While right now, a lot of the art is focused on the individual soldier who might not be that important per se, but has just as rich of a history and value as the general, right? So
mhm, mhm.
it is really important, I believe, to get to know people from different cultures because you think of them as more similar to yourself, which they are.
Y- Yeah, exactly. And I think that was a theme is just noticing we have more as humans, we have more in common than we have, you know, not in common or what, that we're different. And it's good to be I'm personally very glad, and I'm sure many people would agree that we have a diverse human base because if we're all doing the exact same thing, the exact same, it's a monolith is I don't think it's creative, I don't think it's fulfilling. I think it's good to have so many different ways of thinking, doing, and being in the world. And we need to figure out a way to make space and room for all of that. And that's some Latin American decolonial scholars call that pluriversality, call that like pluriversality, decolonial theory. The Zapatistas call it un mundo donde quepan muchos mundos, which means a world where many worlds fit. And of course, that's our job, our task is to find a way to live in harmony with each other, respecting each other, while having those differences. Of course, it gets layered and complicated when it comes to, okay, but what if the way you think is that, oh, I think that these types of people shouldn't exist. And it's like, well, that thinking I will not respect, right? Because once you pass into the line of your thoughts are actually going to enact harm on others and trying to make it so that other viewpoints or people do not have the right to be who they are, that's when I personally am like, okay, that's not something I can respect. But other than that, right, it's like we should all feel empowered to be different from each other so long as we're respecting each other. And I think that that is generally even going to, the region that's a highly controversial, the Israel Palestine conflict. But again, it's not about, oh, you. you like Palestinians more, or oh, you like Jewish people more, oh, you like the, it's not, for me, and I hope for many other justice advocates, it's just how do we all live together in peace? And now, should, at this point, given that region as both Palestinians and Israeli Jews, it's like, how do we find a peaceful and compassionate path forward from that? So yeah, I agree. It's the struggle of our times for sure.
Going back to your experience at work, what were some of the major issues that you found yourself working at when you first got your job at Seha?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I've really enjoyed getting to work in the environmental justice movement and policy advocacy space. At SEHA, I had the pleasure of getting to work with so many different member organizations on issues like community solar, energy affordability, building decarbonization. But it was all of these different policy initiatives were under the umbrella of something that we like to call the just transition framework. And this wasn't unique to SEHA per se. Just transition is like this big framework that a lot of different EJ organizations are use in their type of work planning. And basically, the vision is moving um, from a fossil fuel based society to a clean energy economy, but not only moving from fossil fuels to clean energy, but also doing it in a way that distributes more benefits, power, and opportunities into low income communities, a lot of them being, communities of color, immigrant communities, those who have been historically disinvested in and extracted from because of legacies of redlining and a lot of other terrible practices that have made these communities suffer more. So um, I find the environmental justice movement really exciting for that reason, because it's not just, oh, obviously climate change is very scary and very real, and we're seeing the effects of it in real time. But I see EJ in particular as exciting because it's not just about fighting back from climate change and fighting, trying to survive from climate collapse, but it's also about how do we create the new economy um, that we want to be championing. How do we bring people in? So it's also, it's not just clean energy, but it's energy democracy. It's making sure people have their basic needs met and using this crisis as an opportunity to really flip positions of power and bring power back to the people. So those are some of the different issues and frameworks that I got to work at SEHA.
What's one specific policy that you've been really excited to pass in in California that you would believe would do a great deal to benefit your cause?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I will say this last legislative session was actually a really interesting one to work in California. Um, Gavin Newsom just the other day, yesterday morning, signed a bunch of climate and energy bills into law. And he called it, I think the press release was like the big, beautiful climate and energy bills. So definitely a play on the federal administration, like kind of a counter to that, because obviously Trump is going big on drill baby drill for oil and trying to take away funding for clean energy and roll back our climate progress. But California is saying no, like, we're going to keep moving forward on clean energy, on equity. Of course, I think there's more we can be doing. And as an EJ advocate, I'm always pushing the governor and pushing legislature to do more and do better. But I will say I feel positive and I feel hopeful because I do think there were some good wins this last session. So I got to work on a couple things in the last year or so, I would say, that were also reflected in this last kind of month of finishing the session. Offshore wind is a big one. Offshore wind is like these huge wind farms that are going to be out in the ocean, in Humboldt and in the Central Coast, is primarily where they're going to be building these. And just to say, offshore wind is a huge opportunity for California because we've developed wind onshore, but the offshore wind turbines, they're like bigger than the Statue of Liberty. So they're huge when I say huge, and they're going to be far into the ocean, and they're going to be able to power like millions of homes because of how windy it is, out in the ocean. And because of the way that the windmill, just, all the science elements of it, that science isn't my background, but point being that there's a lot of potential for clean energy through offshore wind. And California has been planning for it for over a decade. Like, this is a very complicated thing to build too, because you need to upgrade the ports, like in Long Beach. That's a big port that's going to get upgraded so it can support building all those turbines. And where you have to build all the transmission for the grid. So transmission lines that you see outside your neighborhood, we need to build a bunch more of those so it can actually carry all that clean power. So that's my spiel on offshore wind, but it's a really big issue. And even though Trump dislikes it, we're moving ahead. California is still planning for that and putting a lot of money and investments there. So that's one thing that I've been working on, continuing to push our state leaders to put money and planning into this and to bring low income communities along in the process, make sure that they have a voice in the planning process and that a lot of benefits come to those regions. By benefits, I mean local jobs, local jobs, more economic opportunities. A lot of times, communities can sign community benefits agreements, which are these contracts with the offshore wind developers that makes the developers pay for other community infrastructure, as a result of the major economic benefits from offshore wind. So a lot of great things there. The other thing I worked on is California's Cap and Invest program, which it's actually was called Cap and Trade if for people familiar with that, and they're calling it Cap and Invest now. And that's a major program that requires major polluters to pay a certain amount of money for the emissions that they release because of their industrial activities. And that program, although it has issues, and EJ advocates, do see a lot of issues with that program that can get stronger, or that can, a lot of, not issues that can get stronger, but a lot of issues that we would want to resolve so that the program can get stronger. It's still overall an important program to fund a lot of climate priorities. So another big part of my last month or so was really pushing the legislators to really pass a bill to reauthorize the program, which means the program can now be extended through 2045. And that's a really big deal because that way there's certainty in the market and we can make sure that there's a lot more investment there. So in broad strokes, I know that may have been a little technical, but really my role has been California, please put a lot of money, a lot of our budget and a lot of the the money that's through this cap and trade, please put it to really good things that can be good for the planet and that can also bring opportunities and even bill savings to low income communities. And I think we're seeing some good wins there, although there's so much more to do. So I'm excited to keep working on those issues.
That seems really interesting. Um, but why did you decide to work specifically in the California legislature instead of, let's say, the country legislator or even something like the UN?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I really love working in California, first and foremost, because I am born and raised in California. This is, my home state. It's where I always feel connected to. Um, and also because California is a really powerful force in the climate and energy space. I mean, we're the fifth largest economy in the world. We're a big innovator in clean energy, and I think that we're really driving a lot of the change that the rest of the nation is even following, and even across the globe, people are turning to California for some of our really innovative strategies. I was just at the California Energy Commission's energy 50th anniversary, and I found it really inspiring because there's just so much that California has done that many people did not think was even possible like a decade ago. So I feel really grateful to be in a state in which that is the vision, and there's that ongoing commitment towards an equitable, clean energy and healthy future for everyone. And then also, of course, because I get to tie my statewide work back to the local communities that are all across the state suffering from different issues, but also being champions of the kind of change they want to see. So I feel really fortunate to have gotten that opportunity both in my roles at Ceja and at Brightline Defense to be working with those in the Central Coast, in Humboldt, in LA, right, that are navigating the realities of the climate crisis and looking to ways to be resilient and pushing California to support on that front. So, yeah, that's a bit there.
Well, what you said so far sounds really inspiring. Could you please share your favorite and least favorite part about your job?
Yeah, thanks. Well, definitely the favorite part of the job, I think is what I touched on a little bit, is getting to work with local communities and think of really cool solutions to push for at the state level that can address their needs and also move us towards a healthier and clean environment. Um, Really, as simple as it sounds, just having good people to work with, like having kind, interesting, smart people to work with, both at my team at Brightline and also in different nonprofits, in the government, and just different partners that we get to really collaborate with, I think is really my favorite part of the job. At the event I was mentioning before at the Energy Commission, I know one person was talking about how one of her takeaways in her career has been always be, kind to people because you never know too, like in this type of work, one day, you'll be working for someone and a couple years later they'll be working for you, or they're regulating you and then you end up regulating them, like if you're in the regulatory agency. So it's just like very interesting how a lot of people in this type of network you'll get to know throughout your career just in different ways, and it's always good to be a good person, a kind person, and transparent, and a good just someone who is showing up honestly and genuinely in the work. And I think that's what makes it so fun and so fulfilling. In terms of my least favorite part, I will say something that I'm working on more and more is definitely kind of the public speaking element, even this kind of thing, interviews, communications, speaking in public. That's still something that's challenging for me, but I do appreciate the opportunity to grow in that area. But yeah, anytime I'm like meant to go speak at a bill hearing, I'm not like, oh yay, I'm so excited. That's probably like my least favorite part, but it's a necessary part. It's a necessary muscle to build to grow in any career, I think. So yeah.
How has your approach to work and all the stuff you just said about like community involvement and such, how has that changed since you first began working?
Yeah, thanks. Well, something that I said earlier is that I'm still rooted in my values. It's now just a matter of thinking about what are the right strategies to push those values forward or to push those principles forward. So I would say that I think since starting my job, I think one thing that has become really apparent to me is that I'm a lot more I do think I'm more thoughtful in my approach these days, and what I mean by that is I think I was quicker to jump to certain perspectives, certain positions when I first started my career, and noticed that there were many times in which I later felt like what I had originally thought was the best approach was not the best approach. Or I realized like, oh, instead of writing this fact sheet, maybe a better idea is doing a webinar, or maybe, instead of uh trying to get 100 people to call this person, actually what would be better is spending a couple months to organize a big trip for the member to come to the region. So it's interesting because there's so many, sometimes it can feel almost overwhelming because there's so many ways to do this work and many ideas that can make a difference. Um, and I think I was a little uh, I think because didn't have the full understanding of the more innovative spirit of the work and how creative it is, I think I was, again, a lot quicker to just jump to thinking, oh, this is the right idea. And now I'm a lot more open and thoughtful, and I do try to bring in other voices even more than in the past because I know that still don't have all the answers. I think the biggest difference that I've made in my career is recognizing that there is so much I don't know. So it's like that saying, the more you know, the less you know. I feel like that's the story of my life because I think I was a lot more confident coming out of college, like, very, very clear about my positions and my ideas and my thoughts. And I think in the years that have followed, just growing and learning that there's more complexity out there, I think has humbled me. And I think that's changed my approach to some ways I do my work as well. Instead of just going forward on one path, I usually take more time to process, think about it, and ask trusted people for advice and bring in more perspective. So I think that has made me even more democratic in my approach, although recognizing that you have to find that sweet spot too, because you have to trust yourself enough to move things forward and not just get delayed thinking, oh, maybe I don't have all the answers, right? But you can also try to bring stuff in and find that sweet spot. So it's not perfect yet, but I do think that over the years, that has been something that I've modified in my approach. And then the other thing is just really finding more time for yourself outside of work. I know a lot of people talk about that and how important it is, but over the years, I found that even more important. That if you're not in community, being kind to others in your own space, you're not gonna really be making enough of a difference in your work either. It's like you have to find not work-life balance, but more the right flow of how you do your work and how you're in community and replenishing yourself. So these days I do Pilates. I try to see my friends more. I have two cats now that I didn't have before. And so I think the more you can really do more outside of work, it actually helps your work, which it seems ironic at first, but it's the truth. It's like the more you take care of yourself, the better you show up in the work, and the more you can do for communities too.
Of course, doing all of this stuff makes your life happier in general. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, doing. I mean, we all have to find our own ways of doing things that bring us joy, and it's going to look different for every person. But I think as long as you are reflecting on what it is you're doing and how it's contributing to your own sense of fulfillment and joy, if you're looking at that and feel comfortable, feel good, then great. Even if that means more work, less play, more play, less work, that kind of orientation. But I think too many of us just forget to to really think, "Hey, am I doing the things that make me happy?" As silly as it sounds, because you could just kind of get caught up in work and school and this and that, and you can feel that pressure sometimes to just do more and buy because you need to buy a bigger house. But at the end of the day, we only have so many years, right? So whether it's travel, whether it's adopting two cats, like I did, or whatever it is that is your priority, just make sure you're keeping track of it. Not to be, stressing yourself out, but just think, hey, am I doing the things that I want to do? And I think that's just something I've leaned into more as I reach my late 20s, and try to make sure I'm grounded in the things that I want to accomplish and the things I want to feel and the people I want to see and the places I want to go, etc.
Of course. So before we close, um, what advice would you give to, let's say, someone similar to your 18-year-old self who's interested in policies like these and wants to get involved in the field of environmental justice?
Yes, this is a great question. I would say firstly, amazing. I'm very glad that you, the royal you, that folks would be interested in this. As I mentioned earlier, this is the time to get engaged. I think it's important now more than ever for the sake of our democracy, for the sake of a functioning society to be engaged. The good news is there's so many ways to get engaged. So I would say starting with even doing a broad Google search or doing a little bit of research into the nonprofits in your area, because I'm sure there's already a lot of amazing groups near you, um, that you would be really interested that could align with your interest. Or wait, let me restate that sentence. But I would even start by going and doing some research online to the local nonprofits or community-based organizations in your area. There's likely a bunch of them that are doing really amazing work, and probably at least some of them that align with your own interests and skills and talents in the world. So either volunteering there or looking at different job opportunities. That's really how I started, is I found Sehat through some searching around on environmental justice, and I was fortunate to pursue a fellowship and get one through my college that let me work for Seha. But there's so many ways to kind of get your foot in the door. I know I have a someone I know in the legislature space that I believe said that they tweeted, or they sent a message. It was Twitter at the time. I know now people are using Blue Sky for many reasons, but at the time, when Twitter was more popular, they sent a tweet to one of the legislators and was just like, I want to work for you. And now they work for them. So, not to say that that will always work, but there's so many ways you can kind of just like reach out to people. If there's professors that seem like they're studying or writing really cool books that you are interested in, even sending them an email, right? I think we sometimes forget that this everything that is being kind of created and thought about, these are just everyday people, even the ones that are supposedly more famous or whatever, right? We're just all people trying, many of which are trying to do good things. So going back to that relational aspect, just find a way to talk to someone about the work they're doing, like what you're doing on this podcast, even, and what many others are doing. I think just having a conversation is a really good first step. Um, and then I would say just don't maybe be a little flexible in your career path. I think right now flexibility is extremely important given so much is changing in the landscape with AI, with this and with that. And it's good to have a vision like I want to be this, right? And that's great if that's your dream, that's your passion. But I would say be more focused on the values that you hold and be a little flexible in terms of the the strategy and the way it shapes out in your career. And by that I mean like be open to different types of exploratory places to work at, because I think that is how you're going to grow and learn more about yourself and see what ends up being more of the right fit for you. So try a lot of different things out, and maybe don't just be rigid and thinking I want to be this. Just be more open, and I think you will find a lot of really generative opportunities. So yeah, those are my couple of advice points for the youth or for anyone actually who wants to engage.
Great. Well, this has been such an insightful and wonderful conversation. Before we close, is there anything else you want to leave the audience with?
No, I think we covered it. I think I probably spoke way more than my allotted time. So I think I'll just end with thank you so much for hosting me, and I hope everyone can find some time for joy and rest and relaxation and dancing and fun, despite some chaos in the world. But thanks so much, John Lincoln. Appreciate it.
Of course, thank you for joining me on this episode. Well, that about wraps it up. I hope you learned as much as I did from this conversation. Until next time, see ya.